It didn't bark. It didn't growl. It just stood there, still as stone. The German Shepherd was all ribs and heat haze, its coat a dull ash from miles of road dust. Its eyes, though, those burned. Not wildly, not in panic, but with purpose. Like it knew something no one else did. Marla Torres saw it before anyone else. The dog was halfway through the glass door of her roadside diner off a dead stretch of Highway 190 in West Texas, standing on cracked tile that hadn't seen a good mop in years. The afternoon sun slanted through the blinds, painting long shadows across the floor and the faded Formica counter. No one spoke. Not at first. Then the bell over the door gave another weak jingle, and a second German Shepherd stepped in. This one smaller, sable-coated, eyes darting like it was reading the room. A third followed, barely out of puppyhood, but with something tense in his gait, like he was still learning how to hold all that instinct. 3 dogs, no collars, no tags, just dust and silence. Marla put down the napkin dispenser she'd been cleaning and stepped around the counter slowly. She hadn't seen a dog in weeks, much less 3 at once, and certainly not 3 that walked into a place like they were meant to be there. "Well, aren't you a sight?" she murmured. The oldest one, black with a scar slicing over his right eye, watched her with that still burning gaze. He didn't move when she bent down, didn't flinch when she set a battered metal water bowl on the floor. The second one sniffed it first, then drank. The pup hovered near the door, pacing, then edged forward and drank last, glancing between the booth seats like he was checking for exits. It wasn't until they'd all settled on the corner rug by the window that the quiet in the diner reset. Conversation trickled back. The waitress behind the counter, new girl named Zoe, let out a breath. The regular near the window flipped his newspaper again. Then the SUV arrived. It slid in without sound, parking at the edge of the gravel lot just beneath the flickering floodlight. Big, grey, tinted all the way around, the kind of car you don't look at too long. None of the dogs made a sound, but the sable one? Marla would later know him as Bravo, rose halfway and froze. His ears snapped forward, his tail stiffened, and his body locked like a lever had been pulled. The pup, Charlie, whimpered. Marla followed their gaze through the smudged window panes. The SUV didn't move, but the tension shifted. She felt it in her stomach first, that slow, crawling unease that comes before a storm. She wiped her hands on her apron and turned back toward the counter, just in time for the door to open again. A man entered. He was tall, late 40s maybe, dressed in a slate-grey suit too clean for the desert. Blonde hair combed back, shoes polished to a quiet gleam. He carried no bag. He smiled at no one. His eyes were a shade of blue that didn't blink. "Coffee," he said, voice like cut glass. Marla poured it. "You want a menu?" He didn't look up. "Black's fine." She set the cup down in front of him, 3 seats away from the trucker nursing a slice of cherry pie. Then she looked at the man's jacket, saw the shape beneath it. Thin, vertical, secured under the shoulder. A holster. Her husband had worn one just like it before Pendleton. Outside, the SUV still hadn't budged. Alpha, the old black dog, stood. He didn't growl. He didn't bark. But his head turned, eyes narrowed toward the parking lot. Then he sat back down, slow and deliberate, facing the window. Marla followed his gaze again. The SUV was still there. Engine running, maybe. She couldn't tell. She heard a low sound. Bravo. He was whining now, but barely. A note just above silence. Not distress, more like warning. The man at the counter took a sip of coffee, then stared back at the window. Charlie's ears twitched. He moved closer to the door, every movement tight, rehearsed. The tension hit Marla like cold water. She didn't know why, but she stepped back. She watched Alpha now, the leader, the one with the scar. He turned toward her, just his head, and locked eyes with the kind of weight you don't expect from an animal. Then he stepped forward, paws landing quiet on tile. And then he did it. He raised his front paw and dragged it across the floor. One line, then another, then a third. 3 straight lines in the dust. Marla's throat closed. Behind the counter, Zoe laughed nervously. "That dog just drew on your floor." But Marla didn't laugh. She stared. Her hands trembled. 3 lines, she whispered. Then she remembered. Felix, sitting at their kitchen table 10 years ago, telling her how POWs used codes to signal distress. 3 blinks, 3 taps, 3 marks. "Marla," the trucker called from behind her. "You okay?" She didn't answer. Outside, the SUV was still there. Inside, Garrett Voss hadn't blinked once. Then Alpha turned and walked to the door. He nudged it open with his nose, the bell giving one soft chime. Charlie followed without a sound. Bravo was last, his body tight, every step a question. Marla felt it in her gut. They were responding to something. Not hunger, not fear, but a call. A call only they could hear. Then she saw it. Movement behind the back seat window of the SUV, just for a second. A flicker of skin behind the tinted glass. A face, eyes swollen, bruised, and blinking. Once, twice, 3 times. Marla gasped. Someone was inside that car. And the dogs, God help her, the dogs were the only ones who understood. She picked up her phone with a shaking hand. Not 911. Not yet. She scrolled to the name saved under Old Friend. "Elena," she said when the sheriff picked up. "Get to the diner, now." "Why? What happened?" "There's a man in a car. I think he's in trouble." "Did he say something?" Marla looked down at the marks on the floor. Alpha had returned, sitting straight across from her. "No," she said, "but the dogs did." Marla stood still behind the counter, hand hovering above the worn-out cash register, eyes fixed on the dogs. They weren't just wandering strays. Not anymore. Not to her. Alpha sat like a sentinel, still and regal, his gaze never leaving the tinted SUV outside. Charlie paced in slow arcs near the door, his nose twitching toward the frame like something beyond it didn't sit right with him. And Bravo. His body was taut like a coiled spring, eyes locked on the vehicle, ears flicking every few seconds, tracking sound that no one else could hear. They were working. Marla had seen this before, long ago. On the training field outside Camp Pendleton, her husband, Alex, had been a Marine K-9 handler. He used to come home coated in desert dust, boots still laced tight, and talk about the dogs like they were more than just partners. He said the good ones didn't bark unless they had to. They read the air, tracked shifts in tone, smelled stress. He told her once, with a faraway look in his eyes, sometimes they see things before the evil knows it's been seen. Alpha's gaze narrowed. She followed it again to the SUV, still parked by the broken lamppost. No one had gotten out. No window had rolled down. And yet, she saw it too now. Something was wrong. Zoe tapped a spoon against a coffee cup behind her, breaking the silence. "Those dogs giving you the willies, or is it just me?" she said, her voice trying too hard to be casual. Marla didn't answer. Her mind drifted back to a conversation, years ago, in the dead heat of a California summer. Alex, holding a leash with a sweating black shepherd sitting obediently at his heel, told her, "If your dog suddenly stares at something like it owes him money, pay attention. Something's off." Bravo was staring now, not blinking, not shifting, just burning a hole into the side of the SUV with the kind of focus that made your chest tighten. Marla stepped from behind the counter and walked past the booth windows, each pane dull with grime. She leaned close, careful not to startle the dogs, and squinted towards the vehicle again. Still nothing. No door opened, no engine cut. But something had shifted. She felt it like a vibration in the soles of her feet. Then Charlie stiffened. The young dog moved to the back of the diner, nose pressed low to the linoleum, tail lowered but alert. He stopped near the hallway to the restrooms and sniffed the air with short, sharp bursts, his head tilting. A moment later, he sneezed hard, then whined. Marla's skin prickled. The regular at the booth chuckled. Guess they're looking for breakfast scraps. They're not hungry, Marla said, more to herself than to him. Charlie returned to the front, and all three dogs now formed a loose triangle near the door, never quite blocking it, but claiming the space. Protective. Strategic. That wasn't coincidence. That was training. Marla's phone buzzed in her apron. Sheriff Elena Vega. You called? Elena said. Said something about a guy in a car? Marla stepped toward the office, voice low. There's a man here, inside now, pale suit, no name, no smile. Dogs came in before he did. One of them drew 3 lines on the floor. There was silence on the other end. Elena. 3 lines. The sheriff repeated slowly. That's military code. SOS. I know. You sure they weren't just playing? Elena, she said firmly. I've seen working dogs before. My husband trained them. These dogs aren't playing. They're watching, calculating. Okay, I'm 15 minutes out. Keep calm. Don't escalate. Marla hung up, but as she returned to the counter, she saw something that stopped her cold. The man in the slate suit, Garrett, she'd learned from the card he slid across the counter, was no longer looking at the window. He was watching the dogs now, specifically Alpha, and he wasn't smiling anymore. That was when Bravo stood up and moved. He walked slowly across the diner, weaving between tables like he'd done it 1,000 times, then stopped behind the man's stool, his body low, his eyes locked. Hey, Zoe said, alarmed, grabbing a dish towel like it might help. Is he going to bite? No, Marla whispered. He's waiting. Then, in the quiet that followed, the man, Garrett, spoke without turning around. I'd keep that animal back if I were you. His voice was calm. Too calm. Bravo didn't flinch. Neither did Alpha. Charlie growled, barely audible, deep and vibrating from the chest. Marla stepped forward, her hand inching toward the leash hanging on the wall since 2015. It had belonged to Alex's last dog, Roscoe. She never threw it out. She didn't know why. Now she did. But before she reached it, Garrett stood and placed a $100 bill on the counter. He smiled again, this time with his eyes. I think I'll take my coffee to go. He turned, faced Bravo, and stared him down for a full 3 seconds. The dog didn't move. Just breathed. Then Garrett walked out. The dogs didn't follow. Not yet. Outside, he slid into the driver's seat of the SUV, never looking back. But Marla didn't breathe until the engine revved and the vehicle pulled out. Not fast, not slow, just gone. And still the dogs stood watch. She looked down at the floor. 3 lines, drawn not in dust, but in truth. Someone had sent them. Someone was calling for help. And these dogs, somehow, some way, had heard it. Garrett Voss sat with his back straight, suit sharp as a razor's edge. He hadn't removed his sunglasses even after stepping out of the bright Texas sun. That alone was strange enough in a place like this. But what unsettled Marla the most was how still he was. His order had been simple. Black coffee. No sugar, no cream, no small talk. Now the untouched mug sat steaming in front of him as he stared across the room, not at the TV on mute or the faded map of highway routes by the window, but at Bravo. The German shepherd didn't blink, didn't move. Neither did Garrett. What most customers didn't notice, Marla did. Garrett's right hand. It kept drifting to his ribs. Not rubbing, not fidgeting, just touching, deliberately. Each time, fingers pressed against the inside of his jacket, low and close to the body. Marla had seen that movement before, back when Alex would gear up before going out. It wasn't habit, it was readiness. She wiped her hands on her apron and forced herself to move. Outside, Alpha had wandered from the diner's door, slipping away like fog into the early afternoon heat. Nobody noticed, except Marla and maybe Garrett. Alpha circled the lot, head down, body low, tail still, each step calculated. Charlie stayed inside by the door, sitting now, nose tilted towards the front window. He let out a single, low huff. Bravo didn't break eye contact with Garrett. Garrett, in turn, slowly lifted his fingers from the edge of his jacket and finally removed his sunglasses. His eyes were ice. Empty. Not dead, just unreadable. "You ever seen dogs like this?" Zoe whispered, leaning in toward Marla from the side of the counter. "Only once," Marla replied, barely louder than a breath. Outside, Alpha crept around the back of the SUV. The vehicle sat humming softly, engine still on, AC faintly rattling inside. It was a late-model Lincoln Navigator with rear-tinted glass and government plates that didn't feel quite right. Alpha paused near the back bumper, head tilted, ears angled forward. Then he saw it. The tiniest movement in the narrowest gap, a crack in the rear window shade. And behind it, a face. Someone was inside, a man, bound, gagged, and blinking. 3 deliberate blinks. Pause. 3 more. SOS Alpha stiffened. For half a second he didn't move. Then he backed away slowly, circled left around the SUV, and trotted toward the front of the diner again. Inside, Garrett reached into his jacket. Charlie rose. So did Bravo. "Hey," Zoe said sharply. "Sir?" Garrett's hand paused, still inside his coat. He smiled, barely. "Just my wallet," he said. "Relax." But Bravo wasn't buying it. Neither was Marla. Neither apparently was Alpha, who now pushed open the glass door with his snout, stepping back inside like a soldier returning to base with intel. He moved past the booths, silent but urgent, and came to Marla's side. His eyes locked with hers. Then he turned, stood between her and Garrett, and gave a single, low growl. Bravo mirrored him. Garrett stood, slowly. His chair scraped across the tile like a blade across bone. Marla's breath hitched. Then Garrett did something strange. He raised both hands slightly, not surrendering, not apologizing, just performing, and walked towards the door. But not before leaning close enough to Bravo to say, almost inaudibly, "Nice. Dogs. Hope you keep them on a leash." Marla didn't respond. Garrett stepped out into the heat. The SUV's rear door popped open automatically. He slid inside, and the moment it clicked shut, Alpha barked. Just once. Sharp. Commanding. Marla flinched. The 3 dogs snapped into motion. Bravo ran toward the back exit. Charlie darted to the front. Alpha stood his ground, facing the door, body tense like a coiled spring. "What the hell is going on?" Zoe gasped, but Marla didn't answer. She was already grabbing the radio from under the counter. "Sheriff Vega," she said into the static. "He has someone in that car. Bound, gagged, blinked SOS Alpha saw it. I saw Alpha see it." There was a pause, then Vega's voice. "I'm 2 minutes out. Stall him if you can." But it was too late. The SUV roared to life and peeled out of the lot, wheels screeching across the pavement. "Charlie!" Marla shouted. The youngest of the trio was already at the front door, nose pressed to the glass, ears flicked forward. He let out a single, short whine. "They're gonna follow him." Marla whispered. "Aren't they?" The dogs didn't answer. They didn't have to. The moment the SUV tore out of the lot, a silence hung in the diner like dust after an explosion. No one moved. Not Zoe, not Marla, Not the few regulars hunched over their plates of fries and lukewarm coffee. All eyes were on the dogs. Alpha stood at the door, hackles raised, ears pricked forward. Bravo growled low, steady, a sound that didn't come from fear, but from warning. And Charlie, the youngest and lankiest of the trio, blocked the entrance, body angled like a sentinel. "They're not just acting out," Marla said under her breath. "They're communicating." Zoe gave her a sideways glance. "Communicating what?" Marla didn't answer. Instead, she reached for the mop bucket stashed behind the counter, dumped it over, and turned it upside down. With her foot, she cleared a space on the tile floor. "Let's see if it happens again." Alpha stepped forward. Calm, deliberate. With the edge of one paw, he scratched a line into the dust of flour and coffee grounds on the floor. Then another. Then a third. 3 parallel lines. Again. Zoe stared. "That's not random." From the corner booth, an older man with thick glasses and a trucker's cap slowly stood up. He had the kind of gait that came from long miles and a lifetime of hard landings. Glenn Barnett had been a regular for years, never said much beyond ordering pie and asking for fresh coffee. Now he cleared his throat. "Mom," he said to Marla, "you mind if I say something that might sound crazy?" She gave him a look that said, "Try me." "I've seen these dogs before," he said. 2, maybe 3 weeks back, off Highway 12, near that old ranger station they closed down after the fire." Marla blinked. "That's a good 30 miles from here." Glenn nodded. "I was camped out. Near there. Saw 'em sniffing around a blue Chevy Suburban parked just off the service road. Thought it was weird. Dogs without collars, acting like they had a mission." "Blue Suburban?" Zoe echoed. "That's what they were driving. The one Garrett came in. Same model, same tint. But here's the kicker." Glenn said, his eyes narrowing. "That's the same area where that girl went missing. The college student from Lubbock. She was headed to Big Bend, but she never made it past the halfway mark." Marla felt something cold ripple through her chest. "You're saying these dogs were near the vehicle of a missing person?" "I'm saying they were tracking something," Glenn replied. "And now they're here, scratching signals on your floor and staring down some guy in a suit. Doesn't feel like coincidence." Zoe looked at Marla. "So what do we do now?" Marla didn't hesitate. She picked up the phone from the back counter, dialed a number she hadn't used in years. It rang twice before a voice answered, warm, deep, and familiar. "Elena Rivas," said the woman on the other end. "Elle," Marla said, exhaling for the first time in minutes. "It's Marla. I need you to come to the diner. Now." A pause. Then, "What's going on?" "I think I just watched a kidnapping drive away in a government SUV, and the only witnesses left behind are 3 dogs who are acting like they're ex-military." Another pause, longer this time. "Elena." Marla pressed. "I'm already grabbing my keys," Elena said. 10 minutes. Marla hung up. She turned to Glenn. "You said you saw the dogs sniffing around the Suburban near the ranger station. Did anyone else see them?" Glenn shook his head. "Nope, but I trust my memory, and I trust dogs." Marla looked down at the 3 of them, Alpha, Bravo, and Charlie. Alpha met her gaze. Calm, present, waiting. "These aren't strays," she said quietly. "They're trained. They know exactly what they're doing." Glenn nodded. "I'd bet my pension on it." Outside, the wind picked up, sweeping across the flat stretch of Texas road like it was trying to erase everything that had just happened. But inside the diner, the truth had already left a mark, etched in 3 silent lines on a dirty floor. And for the first time since her husband died, Marla felt something stir inside her. Not fear, not confusion, conviction. The sun had dipped below the horizon, casting long violet shadows over the rest stop. The humming lights inside the diner flickered once, then stabilized. Outside, the parking lot was swallowed by the kind of dusk that makes every movement feel too quiet, too sharp. Inside, nobody moved. Garrett Voss still sat at the corner table, eyes fixed ahead, posture composed. But there was a shift, a tautness in his shoulders, a tell. He knew he was being watched. Marla stood behind the counter, the phone still in her hand even though the call with Elena had ended 5 minutes ago. Elena was en route. She had said 10 minutes. It had already been 8. Alpha had been lying near the door, tail curled tightly against his side, eyes half-lidded. But without a sound, he rose. Bravo followed suit. They didn't look at each other, didn't wait for a cue. They simply moved, fluid, precise, and slipped through the swing door and out into the dark. Only Charlie stayed inside, his head lowered, eyes fixed on Garrett. The shepherd's breath came shallow, quiet, but his chest quivered with readiness. Garrett stood up. He dropped a $10 bill on the table and adjusted the cuffs of his tailored suit coat. Not once did he glance toward the counter, but his right hand stayed just above his belt line, grazing the hidden holster. Marla didn't speak. Neither did Zoe. Glenn clenched the edge of his booth table but didn't rise. Garrett moved toward the door. Charlie blocked the path. The man paused for a heartbeat. No more, then took a slow step forward. Charlie didn't growl. He didn't bare his teeth. He simply stared, his body steady as granite. The door creaked open behind Garrett. The man stepped outside. Charlie gave one bark. Sharp, singular, the kind of bark that didn't ask permission. It declared something. From the windows, they watched as Garrett stepped onto the cracked asphalt, heading toward the SUV. Then it happened. Alpha and Bravo emerged from either side of the lot, moving with purpose, not stealth. No hesitation, no circling. They came straight for him, angles sharp, bodies low. Garrett froze. Then he turned. Fast! Too fast! His jacket lifted, hand dropping toward the weapon tucked beneath. But Charlie was already in motion. The youngest of the trio tore through the doorway and exploded into the night like a missile. His paws hit the pavement with force, nails scraping, every muscle firing in perfect sync. Garrett pulled the gun free. He didn't get a chance to aim. Charlie leapt. No sound, no warning. He collided with Garrett's chest, knocking the man backward. The gun skidded across the lot, landing with a cold, metallic clatter. Garrett hit the pavement hard, the air knocked from his lungs. Alpha was on him next, pinning his right arm. Bravo stood over the dropped pistol, one paw anchoring it to the ground, as if he'd done this exact thing 100 times. Inside the diner, Marla exhaled like someone had just pulled her up from underwater. She rushed for the door, flinging it open as Zoe and Glenn followed behind. Garrett lay flat, one elbow blooded, the suit torn at the shoulder. His mouth opened in protest, but no words came out. Just breathe, shallow and sharp. Charlie didn't snarl. He didn't need to. He stood over Garrett's chest, weight balanced, ready to strike if needed. His eyes were locked, focused, almost human in their intensity. And in that moment, under the buzzing lights and against the backdrop of an empty desert night, something clicked in Marla's memory. The training her husband once described, the signals, the drills. The dogs weren't reacting. They were executing. These weren't strays. These were war dogs. And now they were protecting something. Or someone. Sirens broke the quiet. 2 sharp pulses, then the crescendo of a cruiser closing in. Red and blue lights bathed the edge of the parking lot as a county vehicle skidded to a stop. Sheriff Elena Rivas stepped out before the dust had even settled. She took one look at the scene. 3 dogs, 1 man down, gun on the ground, and reached for her cuffs. Nobody said a word until Garrett, pinned and panting, muttered hoarsely, You don't know what you're messing with." Elena didn't flinch. She kneeled beside him, cuffed his wrists behind his back, and said coolly, "Then maybe you can tell me. On the record." Charlie backed off slowly. Bravo stepped aside. Alpha released Garrett's arm with surgical control. The three dogs moved as one, returning to Marla's side like soldiers coming home from a mission. And under the artificial glow of the diner sign, Marla looked at them, not as animals, but as comrades, because only they had known what was coming. And they didn't bark, they acted. Elena's flashlight cut across the cracked windows of the grey SUV. Marla stood beside her, heart hammering, while the dogs, Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, watched silently from behind. Not one bark, not one step forward. They stood at perfect attention, eyes trained on the vehicle like it was still a live battlefield. Elena reached the driver's side and tried the handle. Locked. She nodded at Deputy Marquez, who stepped in with a thin crowbar. One pop, then another. The door groaned open. Inside, slumped awkwardly across the back seat, was a man. Gaunt, eyes sunken, lips cracked, wrists zip-tied, ankles bound. His uniform was torn, caked in sweat and desert dust. But his gaze was sharp, alert. Staff Sergeant Cole Bennett. Missing for 12 days. Last seen in Nevada en route to a security consult job that never confirmed his arrival. The official reports had already assumed desert exposure, possible ambush, presumed dead. But he wasn't dead. He was blinking. 3 times, slowly, again and again. 3. Pause. 3, like a metronome for survival. Marla recognized it now. The message. SOS. And the dogs had caught it before any human did. Cole's lips barely moved. "Water, please." Elena dropped to one knee and cut the restraints with her folding blade. Marquez was already at her side with a thermos of water. Cole drank in short, careful sips. His hands trembled. "I thought no one was coming," he rasped. "You had backup," Elena said, glancing at the dogs. Cole followed her eyes. His breath caught. Alpha took a step forward. He tilted his head slightly. No tail wag, no theatrics. Just recognition. "You," Cole whispered. "Alpha." The shepherd blinked once. A slow, deliberate motion. Cole's voice, cracked with something deeper than fatigue. "They found me." Marla felt something shift in her chest. Not sorrow, not even joy. Something older, something closer to reverence. As medics arrived, Elena gave the order to search the SUV. A second man was found unconscious in the cargo area, Garrett Voss's accomplice. Gagged and zip-tied by his own partner, apparently knocked out during the chaos in the parking lot. He wouldn't be talking anytime soon. Inside Garrett's coat, they found false IDs, a burner phone filled with coordinates, and a partial list of names. Military names. Cole's name was second from the top. What were they planning? Elena muttered. Extraction targets. Cole managed. We weren't supposed to survive. One of the deputies looked toward the dogs. And they just knew? They didn't just know, Marla said, her voice low. They listened, and they remembered. The parking lot glowed with the swirl of police lights and EMT flashlights, but in the middle of the chaos, the dogs remained still. They didn't pace, didn't seek praise. They stood sentinel beside the man they'd come for. Bravo stayed at Cole's feet. Charlie took watch near the cruiser holding Garrett Voss. Alpha positioned himself at the edge of the scene, as if scanning for threats only he could sense. Not one bark, because there was no need. These were not dogs who sought affection. They weren't pets waiting for treats or pats on the head. They were soldiers. Ma'am, a medic said, gesturing to Marla. He asked if you found them. The dogs. We didn't, she replied. They found us. Elena knelt beside Alpha. Where did they come from? Marla looked at her friend and said, My husband used to say, You don't command a canine like that. You earn their loyalty, and they'll do what even humans won't. Elena's eyes met Alpha's. Then we owe them more than thanks, she said quietly. Cole's stretcher was wheeled into the ambulance. The dogs didn't follow. Not yet. Charlie looked at Alpha, a twitch of the ear. Bravo shifted his weight, waiting. And when Alpha gave a slight nod, barely perceptible, they moved. One by one, they walked to the side of the ambulance and lay down in the dirt beside it. Not because they were tired, because their mission wasn't done. And as the desert wind rose again, whispering through the open fields behind the rest stop, it carried something unseen, something that didn't need words. 3 dogs, 1 code, a Marine rescued, and not a single bark. The courtroom smelled faintly of lemon polish and nerves. Marla Torres adjusted the collar of her blouse, feeling the weight of 1,000 unsaid things pressing on her shoulders. She'd never imagined standing here, on the witness stand, under oath, facing a man who once sat quietly in her diner with eyes colder than steel. Garrett Voss didn't look at her. He hadn't looked at anyone since the trial began. His lawyer sat stone-faced beside him, flipping pages and whispering into his ear every now and then. But Garrett never reacted, not when the charges were read, not when the names of the missing soldiers were spoken, not even when Staff Sergeant Cole Bennett walked into the courtroom, alive. Now it was Marla's turn. The prosecution calls Marla Torres. She stepped forward, boots clicking softly on the wooden floor. Elena caught her eye from the gallery, just a nod, steadying. Cole was there too, thinner than before, his face still healing, but his eyes focused. Marla took her oath and sat. What do you do for a living, Ms. Torres? I run a roadside diner outside El Campo, Texas. Were you working on the evening of the incident involving Staff Sergeant Cole Bennett? I was. And can you tell the court what you witnessed? She inhaled, held it, released it slow. A man walked into my diner, dressed clean, looked like a businessman. He didn't speak much, just sat near the window, ordered coffee. But it was what happened outside that caught my attention. Go on. There was a grey SUV parked in the lot. Unusual because it had been sitting there for too long, and because of the dogs. The dogs? Marla smiled, just a little. She looked toward the gallery. Charlie sat at the back, his head resting on his paws. Bravo lay beside him, eyes alert. Alpha stood at attention near the side exit, tail low, ears up. They had been allowed in at the judge's discretion, as silent observers. They're not mine, she said softly. But that night, 'twas like they belonged to the moment. A few jurors glanced back at the dogs. What exactly did they do, Ms. Torres? Marla told them about the paw marks, the 3 parallel lines Alpha had drawn into the dusty floor. Bravo's low growl, Charlie blocking the door. About the moment they swarmed Garrett Voss in the lot. About the gun. About Charlie leaping before the shot was fired. The video had already gone viral by then. Captured by a teenager's live stream from across the lot, it had over 1.2 million views before the trial even began. But now, the court watched it on the overhead monitor. Slow motion. Grainy, but undeniable. Garrett stepping out. The tension. The draw of the weapon. And Charlie, lunging before a single shot echoed, disarming him with nothing but fury and precision. They risked everything, Marla said, not because anyone told them to, but because they understood something we didn't. The room was silent. The prosecutor shifted tone. Mrs. Torres, did the dogs bark during any of this? No, Marla said, not once. Did they wait for commands? Number they acted on their own. The prosecutor let that hang. No further questions. The defense declined to cross-examine. Later that day, a young girl was called to speak as a character witness. Her name was Lily Barnes, age 7, daughter of one of the EMTs who responded that night. Too young to testify formally, but the court allowed her drawing to be shown. It was crayon on construction paper, a stick figure man in the back seat of a car, 3 dogs surrounding the vehicle like guardians. Above them, she had written in bold red letters, "They knew." The judge let out a quiet breath. In that moment, the courtroom changed. No legal argument could explain what the dogs had done. No statement from the defendant could erase the fact that these 3 animals had responded to a distress signal no human could hear, that they'd acted with loyalty, intelligence, and instinct in a way no law book accounted for. And Garrett Voss? He remained silent, even when offered a chance to speak, even when the verdict loomed, guilty on all counts. As the gavel dropped, Marla looked back at the dogs. Charlie's tail wagged once. Alpha blinked slowly. Bravo licked his paw and went back to watching the door. They weren't there for applause. They had never been. Outside the courthouse, reporters crowded for quotes. Marla held back, but a journalist crouched down beside Lily and asked, "How did the dogs know?" Lily smiled. "They're not just dogs," she said. "They're heroes." And somewhere behind the courthouse glass, Alpha stood perfectly still, watching, waiting, ready. Because their job wasn't over. Not yet. 6 months had passed since the trial. The courtroom had faded into memory, but the echo of what happened at the diner still rippled across Texas and beyond. News anchors called it the rescue that had no words. The story of 3 dogs and 1 silent signal had moved thousands. But for Marla, it was never about headlines. It was about what came after. The old auto repair lot at the edge of El Campo had been abandoned for years. Rusted signs, cracked asphalt, and a ghost of oil stains on the cement. But where others saw wreckage, Marla saw possibility. She stood beside Elena Rivas, now in plain clothes rather than uniform, a clipboard tucked under one arm, and paint on her jeans. "Signal 3, Marla read aloud from the new sign, freshly bolted above the door. "Think people will get it?" "They will," Elena said. "Those who need to." The name came from Alpha's message. 3 lines scratched into the floor. A signal, a warning, a call for help. It had saved a man's life. Now it would save more. The facility wasn't fancy. 3 kennels made from repurposed horse stalls, a training yard marked by orange cones and old tires, and a trailer converted into an office. But it was filled with intention, not just to shelter dogs, but to retrain them, redeploy them, rebuild trust with humans who had lost it, and in return, offer those same humans a place to heal. Staff Sergeant Cole Bennett was the first. He still walked with a limp, one shoulder stiff from the weeks of restraint. His sleep came in fragments, but every morning he showed up, at Signal 3 before the sun had warmed the earth. That morning he knelt beside a Belgian Malinois named Rosie, working gently with a leash. "She bolts at loud sounds," he said as Marla approached, "but I'm figuring her triggers. We're learning each other." Marla offered him a thermos of coffee. "So are we all." In the far corner of the yard, Bravo and Alpha lounged under the shade of an old mesquite tree. They watched everything. Elena joked they were part security detail, part judgment committee. Charlie, however, had found a different path. He now lived with Elias, a quiet boy with sandy hair and a habit of looking at the world from behind his mother's leg. Elias had been in foster care since age 3, passed from house to house like a package no one wanted to open. But when he visited the shelter during a school field trip, Charlie, usually aloof, walked right up and sat beside him. Didn't move, didn't nudge, just sat. And Elias, for the first time in weeks, didn't flinch. Now they were inseparable. Charlie slept on Elias's bed, followed him to therapy, and had even sat beside him in court when the adoption was finalized. At the shelter, Elias visited twice a week. Marla had given him a tiny navy blue vest with "Junior Handler" stitched across the back. That morning, Elias was brushing Charlie's coat near the fence, whispering something only the dog could hear. The boy's mother watched from a bench nearby, tears in her eyes but a smile she hadn't worn in years. Marla walked over. "Is he helping?" she asked gently. Elias nodded. "He doesn't talk," he said. "Like I didn't for a while, but he knows, and he doesn't care when I cry." Charlie licked the boy's cheek in response. Inside the trailer, a corkboard had begun to fill with photos, Polaroids of dogs adopted, stories scribbled in ink, clippings from local papers. Cole had added a map. Every pin marked a dog they'd placed with a veteran. There were 12 now, 12 stories of trauma, survival, and trust rebuilt in the space between man and dog. As the sun dipped low, casting gold across the dusty lot, Elena turned to Marla. "You really think this can scale?" "No," Marla said honestly. "I think it can grow the right way. Slow, quiet, like them." She looked toward the tree where Bravo stretched and Alpha rested his chin on his paws. "They don't need a stage," she added. "They just need a mission." That night, Cole locked up after everyone had left. He walked the perimeter, flashlight in one hand, Rosie trotting beside him. Before heading home, he returned to the training yard. Alpha was still awake. The two locked eyes. Cole crouched, holding up 3 fingers slowly, index, middle, ring. Alpha didn't move. Then, carefully, he stood and walked forward, pressing his nose to Cole's hand. A silent recognition, a quiet agreement, and in the stillness of a Texas night, between the fence posts and wind chimes, man and dog stood side by side, not as rescuer and rescued, but as survivors, both given another chance. The sun had just crested the edge of the horizon, painting Signal 3 in soft amber light, when the knock came on Marla's office door. It wasn't rushed, but it carried weight. Elena stepped in first, holding a manila folder thick with papers. Behind her stood a woman in a crisp government windbreaker, dark blue with a discreet Homeland Security patch on the shoulder. "This is Agent Lindsay Hoyt," Elena said. "She's been tracking something, or rather, someone." Marla raised an eyebrow. "Should I be worried?" Agent Hoyt gave a tired smile. "No, Ma'am. If anything, you should be proud." She laid the file on the desk and opened it to reveal 3 photos. Aged, slightly worn, but unmistakable. Alpha, Bravo, Charlie. Younger, fitter. Wearing tan tactical vests marked with faded stenciling. K9 Unit 47TX. "What am I looking at?" Marla asked, eyes narrowing. "Your 3 dogs?" Hoyt replied. "Before the world forgot about them." The story unraveled in layers, each one more surprising than the last. Unit 47TX had been a specialized military K9 team trained for desert ops and covert extraction missions. They'd been attached to a marine reconnaissance group operating along unstable borders in northern Africa. Their handler, Staff Sergeant Dwight Sandor, had reportedly been killed in a transport ambush 5 years ago. Without a handler and with budget cuts looming, the dogs were decommissioned, marked for reassignment or euthanasia. But due to bureaucratic gaps, paperwork delays, misfiled orders, the dogs were released instead of placed. That was supposed to be a quiet fix, Hoyt said, but apparently someone forgot to tell them they were retired. Marla sat in silence, her fingers brushing the edge of the photo of Alpha. "They stayed together?" she asked quietly. Hoyt nodded. "For years. There were sightings across Arizona, New Mexico, into West Texas, always near veterans' facilities, places where trouble brewed. A handful of small incidents were documented, Foiled break-ins, lost hikers rescued, even a narcotics stash exposed at a truck stop. She turned the page to a faded security cam still. The 3 dogs side by side, staring down a man in a hoodie outside a pharmacy. They moved like a team, she continued. No formal command, no orders, just instinct. They never bit unless provoked, never harmed anyone unless someone was in danger. Elena let out a low whistle. A ghost unit. They operated in the shadows. Hoyt said, not for medals, not for masters, just because it was right. Marla swallowed hard, her throat tight. She looked out the window to where the trio now lay, resting under the old mesquite tree. Alpha lifted his head as if he knew. They came here, Marla said, half to herself. Not to rest, to find the next fight worth showing up for. Hoyt stood, her voice softer now. We'd like to offer them a home in the Federal Working Dog Registry, she said. Posthumous if needed. Officially they don't exist, but I think they've earned something better than silence. Marla shook her head gently. They don't need medals. They need missions. Later that day, Cole stood with Eleanor near the training yard, holding a ball as Bravo trotted toward him. Charlie snoozed in a patch of sun. Alpha, as always, kept watch, quiet, focused. You ever think they know more than we do? Cole asked. Elena looked over. I stopped wondering. I just tried to keep up. In town, word of the dogs past began to spread. A reporter came by with questions. Someone offered to start a GoFundMe. School kids wrote letters. But it wasn't the fanfare that stuck. It was the whisper of something larger. That maybe loyalty didn't need a paycheck. That maybe justice didn't always wear a badge. And maybe, just maybe, some soldiers didn't know how to quit, even when the war forgot their names. They don't follow orders anymore, Marla said that night to Cole as they closed the shelter gate. They follow the truth. Cole looked at her. And that's enough? Marla looked out toward the fading horizon. For them? She said. It always was. The gravel crunched beneath Marla's boots as she stepped onto the front porch of Signal 3. It was nearly dusk, the kind that turned the sky into bruised lavender, stretching long shadows across the yard. The world had grown quieter lately, but not silent, never fully silent. Alpha lay beside her, head resting on his paws, the fur around his muzzle more silver than black now. His ears still perked at certain sounds, the shuffle of boots, the chime of wind against metal, but his days of patrolling were behind him. Not because he couldn't, but because he no longer had to. America had found out. After the trial, word spread like wildfire. Cable news ran the story under the headline, Dogs of Valor. Then came the online articles, the interviews, the grainy footage of the standoff in the parking lot. The quiet moment where Alpha, Bravo, and Charlie held a formation tighter than most humans ever could. And then the name stuck. The silent responders. No social media team, no handlers, no medals or PR campaign. Just 3 war dogs who walked away from bureaucracy and followed their own code. People started writing in. Letters, emails, video tributes. A woman in Missouri shared how her service dog had pulled her out of a panic attack during a tornado warning. A retired firefighter from Maine wrote about a Dalmatian who used to sleep by his boots after every call. Kids sent drawings. Veterans sent stories. Some were shaky, typed with one finger. Others were scrawled in journals with coffee stains and dust. Marla read every single one. And when a local documentarian asked to shoot a short film about the shelter, she hesitated only a moment before saying, yes. So now, as the camera rolled, Marla sat on the old wooden steps, one hand resting gently on Alpha's back. Bravo and Charlie were in the yard behind her, dozing in the late sun, with Elias throwing a frisbee just out of frame. Cole stood near the fence, watching over them all, not like a supervisor, but like a brother. The documentarian gave a soft cue. Marla cleared her throat, not to compose herself, but to settle the swirl of emotion inside. Then she looked straight into the lens. "You know, I used to think dogs like these needed people to give them purpose," she said, her voice calm and steady. "But I've learned something out here. Sometimes we're the ones searching, and if we're lucky, they find us first." She paused, glancing down at Alpha, whose eyes blinked slowly but knowingly. They don't need language to be understood. They don't need medals to be heroes. And they don't need orders to do what's right. All they need is trust. Another beat of quiet. She smiled, not for the camera, but for the memory of her husband, for the soldier who lived, and for the thousands who'd felt the wordless comfort of fur against hand. Then, with the wind softly brushing her cheek, she leaned forward. "What's your story with a loyal pet?" she asked. "We've shared ours. Now it's your turn." The screen faded to black. Then white letters appeared on the center of the screen. Honor their instinct. Trust their hearts. Support Signal 3 and the silent responders. Follow the journey. Share your own. The final image. Alpha, standing tall despite his age, on a hill just outside the center, the flag waving behind him. His silhouette still, steady, unbreakable. Join us. Subscribe to German Shepherd for more stories of loyalty, courage, and the unseen bonds that change lives.